Here we are, another ShiftED podcast. Today I'm reaching way west from I think freezing cold in the east to probably nice and balmy out in the west coast there, eh, John?
Yeah, well, it's pretty standard Pacific Northwest, Oregon. So yeah,
Right
rainy.
on.
If you're familiar with Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, that
Yeah,
whole area, it's lots of rain this time of year, but it is gorgeous right
yeah,
now and not freezing, thankfully.
amazing. Yay. So I have John Spencer coming in, Dr. John Spencer, I should say. Used to be a middle school teacher, professor, maker, designer, author, podcaster. Like John dabbles in all things educational, and is always at the forefront of what the trends and what's going on. So I've been hacking through his book, The AI Roadmap, Human Learning in the Age of Smart Machines, and we're going to dive into that. But John, just to kind of like establish our foundation, how did you go from middle school teacher to becoming this huge advocate for ed tech and
Oh
project-based
yeah.
learning, and where did all that start for you?
So it really began with when I was a pre-service teacher. I was never I wasn't your typical like techie necessarily. So you go way back in time. We would have a couple ed tech classes, and I think we learned about web quests back in the day and certain things. And I sometimes would get excited about those ideas, but it was always the instructional side. So I thought, oh my
Hmm.
gosh, if you can curate a set of sites that students can go to and they can answer their own questions, so it was always the learning that excited me. And I
Yeah.
remember oh gosh, it had to probably be 2001, 2002.
Hmm.
Weblogs came out and they eventually became
Right.
blogs, right? And so I learned how
Right.
to code, on my own website
Hmm.
and create a blog. And I just communicated, hey, this is how things are going. My blog was called Musings of a Not So Master Teacher. I was a brand new teacher.
Hmm.
And it
Hmm.
just was I started sharing my thoughts, but then I realized, oh, I can share things that are working. I can talk about ideas, and slowly that education blog community grew bigger and bigger and bigger. But I was always a
Hmm.
teacher blogger, right?
Right. Right.
And so through my own district and working in middle school, I ended up teaching. Started out as social studies and reading intervention. I eventually taught self-contained all subjects.
Hmm.
I got to pilot our photojournalism class, and then help with the redesign of computer class, which was actually just keyboarding into STEM.
Hmm.
So I was
Right.
always rooted in like the teaching side. And what I really began to find was two things about the technology. One, the technology often made things faster and cheaper than they were
Hmm.
before. And when you have no money and time is scarce, that's huge. So that
Right.
was the biggest draw. It was like, oh my gosh, we can use a Rightly, which became Google Docs, and they can peer
Hmm.
edit, and we can do things. And then there was this transformational side of, oh my gosh, well, how can we transform some of the learning too, and how can we do documentaries and things that we've never done before? So that was all happening in the background, ed tech wise.
Hmm.
And I think I would have, if you said, are you passionate about ed tech? I would have said, no, I'm passionate about project based learning. I'm passionate about design thinking. It's
Right.
always been about the pedagogy.
Right.
And along the way, I started doing more and more blogging, video making. I make these little sketch videos on the YouTube channel and things like that.
Hmm.
And I was doing more and more professional development, and I was mentoring new teachers. And I was around, I guess it was year 12 when someone reached out to me and said, hey, there's this position open as a professor of educational technology,
Hmm.
and they're looking for someone who also has a social studies background and someone with a middle school background. And I read the description and I was like, oh, this feels like it's me. I didn't have a doctorate at the time, so I didn't think I'd get it in terms of applying for the job. And so it was really almost by accident, but it was sort of an evolution of just
Right.
working more and more with pre-service teachers and mentoring them at that level, at the school-based level. And so
Right.
yeah, that's how I ended up there. And
It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And John, what do you think about pre-service teachers in the sense that they come in with high expectations, high hopes,
Yeah.
the idea of changing the world. And I mean, I love the enthusiasm.
Yeah.
When do you find that pre-service teachers actually hit the road, um, literally, and start, doing the practice from, kind of this practical kind of observing what the teacher or the professor says and to their practicum to actually getting into that first class? How do you support them in that original journey, those pre-service teachers? Because I mean, I remember my first year was something I'd rather forget. Even the
Yeah.
second year, I would rather forget. How do you keep that kind of like that wide-eyed, I'm going to change the world instilled in them at the same time as this kind of practical idea where, we have to create learning environments for our students?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of there's a tendency to have teachers who are, pre-service teachers, and they were great students and they've been successful. And I always warn them, you're going to hit a lot of failure.
Right.
And the way that I think about it, as I say, it's failing versus failure, right? So failing is temporary, failure is permanent. And
Mm,
just because you're failing in the moment doesn't mean you're a failure, doesn't define you, doesn't, and so what I find for a lot of them is I warn them there will be this sort of shock, this
right.
discomfort,
Mm,
but that's growth. And I find that a lot of times it goes to metaphors. If you have a pre-service teacher who's has a theater background, it's, hey, teaching is a lot like improv. It's yes
mm,
and it's this didn't
right.
work, but we're going to try a new thing, and they
Mm,
get it. If it's someone who's an athlete, it's a reminder that you don't make all the shots. That
mm,
a great hitter, you're fantastic if you hit 1 out of 3, right? You're
right.
going to have 2 out of 3 that fail. So
Right.
it's a lot of those
Right.
things. I think
Mm,
the metaphor that I always lean into is, when I struggled as a first year teacher and I went to my mentor and I said, I'm failing. This is not working. I'm not cut out.
mm,
I can't do it. I literally been in the car crying the day before because I had a parent upset with me. I had a class that was out of control. I had a lesson that tanked. It all culminated. And I remember my mentor said, some teachers are light. They provide wisdom for you, and
mm,
some teachers are like water. They give you something that is like life. They provide you
mm,
so that you can grow on your own. They empower you. They give you that water that you need. And some
right.
teachers are crap, and we need that too because that's the manure
Hmm.
that lets you grow. And I
That's
said, well,
it.
what do you think I am? And he said, you're all three and you'll always be all three.
Hmm.
And if
That's
you
interesting.
convince yourself that you're not, then that's when then that's when you're in trouble. And I thought,
Huh.
yeah, that's it. You will always be, you're going to have lessons that are crap. You're going to have lessons that are water.
That's it.
It's a real earthy metaphor. It's a little, probably
Yeah.
not the best for a podcast, but it connected
It's
with
good.
me. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of times it's the stories we tell ourselves that help
Hmm.
us when you're a new teacher.
Right. And what have you heard through your pre-service teachers as to some of their successes? Like, what are some of the things that lead to better success than others when they're initially first starting? Like similar to you, I had a mentor that said, be organized, like,
Yes.
because it might not come naturally to most
Yeah.
people, that, but you need to be hyper organized
Yeah.
in case, I mean, in case this or that. Like, what are some of
Yeah.
those strategies that you talk about with those pre-service teachers on effective strategies, I guess I should say?
I would agree. I mean, I think being very intentional is
Hmm.
huge. I think that piece about being organized is critical. I mean, going back to the when we at the start of the conversation about AI,
Right.
when working with pre-service teachers, it really is um, these AI tools are fantastic for reducing stress and overwhelm and
Mm,
reducing time. And what we find is, I like to say, take what AI gives you, which is the vanilla, and then modify it based on what you know about your students, the relationships that you're building,
right.
your local context, all these pieces. look, it's easier than ever to design scaffolds and supports, but don't just slip them in there. Be
Hmm.
intentional about this is going to help that kid. This is going to, and I find that a lot of pre-service teachers, the skill in teaching, the creative skill in teaching that has always been around for a while, but is more critical now than ever, is critical consuming and curating
Hmm.
and modifying what AI creates. Now, that's
Right.
always been
Right.
around. Like for us, it was, when I was a brand new teacher, it was how do I use the box curriculum and make it not so boxy, right? Right?
Right. Right.
And so
Yeah.
it's that intentionality. It's
Hmm.
adding your own voice. It's adding those pieces. And I think the teachers that do it really well are the ones that are really intentional about what they're doing. And Chris,
Hmm.
I'm with you. Like the be organized piece is huge. That
Yeah.
was my biggest struggle as a first year teacher was
Yeah. Yeah.
it did not come naturally to me at all.
Yeah. And it's not something that you're really necessarily taught either.
Mhm.
As a pre-service teacher, there's so much too, like technology as well. Like you don't get a ton of introduction into integrating tech in an effective way where the technology is almost invisible, and it's about the intent again. Um,
Yeah.
Speaking of AI, John, where do you recommend teachers start? Like if they're coming new to this and they're
Yeah.
trying to change their mindset from, oh, it's a cheating tool and it's, to cut corners, to the mindset, this could help me in a way. Where do you suggest that teachers just coming into it might start discovering what it can do
Yeah.
for them?
So, my first piece of advice is yeah, you really have to come at it from a like a playful mindset.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and I would say, just play. I
Right.
remember back in the day getting teachers into having students do content creation, blogging and podcasting and stuff. And I
Hmm.
initially had, a professional development that I led, and I was a classroom teacher at the time, and it was all about how to do student blogging and how to, and I found that
Okay.
they didn't implement it.
Hmm.
I showed lessons, I showed, and they were still afraid. And then the second time I did that with a group of teachers, we didn't do the student side at all. I just said, let's explore how to blog, how to create a sports blog, a food blog, a this blog,
Hmm.
whatever it was. And then
Right.
some of them were like, oh my gosh, we could totally do that in science. Oh, we could. And they were making
Hmm.
that connection. So I would say that was
Hmm.
my lesson of, oh, for a lot of technology, if you are afraid, then you just have to see you won't break it, right? You
Right.
just have to play with it.
Right.
Now, what I would say for someone starting out is a couple of things. One is generative AI is just the latest evolution of AI, right? So
Hmm.
AI is anytime we use algorithms to mimic human cognition. Um, you know, on a theoretical level, the Dewey Decimal System predates
Hmm.
computers, right? AI predates computers.
Right.
Um, and we've been
Right.
using systems, algorithms to engage in our thinking for years.
Hmm.
But the comparison I love to give from our lifetime, I'm aging myself here, is the a primitive form of AI in writing would be spell check. And at
Right.
first, people thought spell check was cheating. We need to remember that, right?
Hmm.
That was a cheating tool. And then
That's right.
grammar check, and then autofill. And autofill definitely sounded like cheating. Everyone's like, turn off autofill. Now we
Yes.
use it all the time,
Yeah.
especially for emails. And now generative AI is just the latest evolution. And so I think a really good starting place is recognizing this is not an AI revolution, it's an evolution. And we're
Hmm.
in the midst of a new evolution. With
Hmm.
that said, I think it's really important that we ask what AI does well and what we do well. And so the next step that I would say when you're new is to just play around and notice what it does well and what it does poorly. It's great at
Right.
synthesizing, it's great at generating fast responses,
Hmm.
it's great at giving you things that are a little bit derivative, a little bit cliche, a little bit because it's using predictive analytics. Um, what is it not good at? It's not good at voice. You're gonna need to provide your own unique voice. It's not good at context. And along with context, I would say it doesn't know your local context, it doesn't know your students, but it also tends to contextually reinforce bias and stereotypes. Like one of the challenge that I've done, we did this with a group of high school seniors who were
Mm-hmm.
potentially going to use it. And the teacher said, I want you to understand bias and looking at a text, it was really hard. But I give you the challenge of ask um, uh, for it to generate a photo or a photorealistic picture of a couple getting married. And what are you going to see? You're going to see the bias there. I'm
Right.
telling you, I go challenge you to go look it up. There is a distinct couple. They're going to be young. They're going to be skinny. He's going to be taller than her. They're going to be heterosexual. They're going to be white. It's going to be a traditional, Christian wedding. Certainly don't see Hindu a wedding ceremony, nothing like that. And so it's a
Right.
really interesting activity. So understanding there's going to be bias. And then it also doesn't do curiosity well. We have to be curious ourselves.
Right.
From there,
Right.
I would just say play around with it, ask it to create things, use it as a co-creation tool where you create things from scratch, but also use it as a curiosity tool where you just ask questions and engage in your own personal inquiry. And I think when you play with it first, then it becomes really easy to go, oh, I could use it to come up with lesson ideas, or oh, I could use it
Right.
to come up with scaffolds. I could use it to come up with vocabulary. You know what? I'm struggling to come up with a Frere model in vocabulary. I'm going to use that. A friend of mine in I was just in Pennsylvania was saying, I use it for this Frere model piece, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've never done that, but it makes a lot of sense.
Right. Right.
So just really, I would say almost test the boundaries of seeing what it's
Yeah.
capable of doing. And then ask yourselves, all right, now, how do I use this for my students? And then eventually you can pull back and say, okay, how do I use it with my students?
Right, right. And John, do you usually recommend like just the Chat GPT or Gemini, like
Yeah,
just a general, like just
I think
throw in some
starting
ideas,
general.
see what it spits out? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and my reason for that is, I think there are fantastic uses of AI. It's great for things like creating leveled readers with Diffit, for example,
Yeah.
or creating a newsletter, a general lesson plan on Magic School or even
Mm,
School AI. There's all these tools. I'm amazed at the ability of students to use it for inquiry in Conmigo or getting
right.
feedback on Conmigo. There are these great student tools. They tend to be expensive, right? So there's a cost there, but they
Yeah.
also are so tailored to education that we sometimes need to pull back and say, okay, but that's assuming education will always be the way it was. What if I play around with it in this other way, knowing what education could be? You know what I mean?
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
like I had
Yeah.
a, I had someone. There's a great thinker in the ed tech space named Chris Evans, and he really pushed me to see how you can use AI as a tool for reciprocal teaching. And he
Mm,
showed me how you would have a student use this prompt of, I'm learning about blank. I'm going to give you my theories, and I want you to ask reflective questions as I get closer and closer to discovering the answer, right? That's
wow.
way
That's cool.
different than any of those school-based AI tools will be,
Right.
but
Yeah.
it was amazing. And I watched this and I thought, wow, yes, like
Mm,
that's a great way to play around with it. And then so I know my answers are kind of all
yeah.
over the place here, but
No,
I would
no. I
just
mean,
say like
it's
really play with it.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, one of the things too that I was thinking about, I've been thinking a lot about differentiation and
Mm,
and when you bring that word in, teachers think, oh, I got to make a lesson plan for every kid, depending on like, and I'm like, no, it's not necessarily that, but you're aware of all the different students that sit in front of you. And I thought
mhm,
the AI would just be like an amazing thing to help with IEPs, for example,
mhm.
because it not only would start to inform you about your students, but also start to create a profile that you it could live with that student and kind of grow as it goes along. Um, do you see there's a future with that with AI where it actually would help inform teachers about, well,
Yeah.
Chris really learns best when there's a lot of visuals involved and there's, you got to remove some of the harder words that, whatever it might be. Do you see a future like that?
Oh, absolutely. And there's so many different things. When it comes to things like IEPs, you obviously don't want to put in any student,
Right.
information,
For
data
sure. For sure.
privacy. But
Yep.
once you get past that, it is amazing because of the way that the training data works, giving you trends on
Mm,
on what things might work, giving you ideas of what to do, and then actually designing some of those initial,
mm.
scaffolds and supports for
Yeah.
students.
Right.
One of the things I'm
Right.
blown away by is the ability to create leveled readers. You might
Mm,
have a student who their independent reading level is a third grade level, a fourth grade level, and they're supposed to be learning about something that is intellectually deep about ancient Egypt. You're not going to find anything out there at the third grade level that does that.
right.
Now you can go just as deep academically, but let them read at their independent reading level. You
Mm,
can create decodables based on a student's interest level. You can potentially look at reading fluency and find out what skill practice they need to do in terms of phonics and blending, but then give
right.
them a customized piece to practice
Right.
that they like,
Mm,
that connects to some topic they like. I mean,
for
that
sure.
is where I think there's so much potential. Um,
Yeah.
and it gets really exciting. And so I think we have to go beyond just well, let's use it to make our own lesson plans to say, okay, well, actually, this is a really powerful tool to meet students where they're at.
For sure. I love it. I love it. And talking about our like content areas, right? I mean, we do get fixated on content and assessment and testing and the whole educational juggernaut that exists. How do you think AI is going to affect or redefine content areas? For example, in math or science or physics, where do you see that kind of happening where we can shift away from the teacher in the front with the PowerPoint and all the, the teacher as the
Yeah.
sage of everything and kind of change that dynamic so that there's a little bit more of the of student ability in within content area.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different, like, let's take math, for example.
Hmm,
In math, the ability to create multiple problems where, we would call them sticky problems, where a student finds an answer to a word problem and then they find that their consequence of their answer leads to a new problem. That's the way
hmm,
applied mathematics works. You can
yeah.
set that up, setting up simulations,
Hmm,
developing more authentic, essentially scenario-based problems that, I mean, there's so much potential there. But also, as a diagnostic tool to find out this is where you're struggling, this is where you need skill practice.
right.
Um, One of my favorite things, and I did this, my son in chemistry, he took a bunch of his student work that he was doing and he wanted to study for a test. And so he
Hmm,
said, based upon what you see there, give me a list of the aspects of chemistry where I'm still struggling.
hmm,
Now give me an information text explaining that. Now I'm going to ask you questions to try to clarify it. And now
hmm,
he's using it as an inquiry tool. And then he
hmm,
flips it and says, now quiz me on what I've just learned using multiple choice and then open-ended questions. That's a really powerful,
yeah.
it's almost like this individual thought partner that you get to have, this tutor that you get to have.
Yeah.
But then I also
That's so
think the
cool.
way that we do those subjects areas are going to change because of AI. I mean, the way that we
Hmm,
do science is going to change. The way that we learn about our universe is going to change, and like astrophysics and all that kind of stuff.
hmm,
But at the same time, I think we're also going to need to like lean into some of those things that are non-tech, right? The sketch
right.
notes and the math manipulatives and the whiteboards and all these other ways of
Right.
doing math and science and all those subjects as well. So it's going to
Hmm,
be a fun thing where you say, okay, how do we take what we're already learning, the ways that we're already learning, amplify it with AI? How do we move away from the AI for a moment and do this hands-on, tactile, collaborative, in-person aspect? And then also, how do we ask, well, how will the technology reshape what we're
right.
learning and the way that we're doing it? And so
Hmm,
to me, I think it's a little overwhelming at times, but it's also really
sure.
exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that too, that idea of AI for students where it helps them um fill in the gaps that might exist on their own, you know, like why reteach the whole lesson when it's only two kids that might not have gotten
Yeah.
it all, where you could they can go and kind of figure out where it is they are and get that information. And it's amazing. Like I love that idea, and I love the idea too of the teacher kind of toolkit that they create with AI that
Yeah.
enables them, you know, and helps them with so much that goes on in a teacher's life. John, this has really been a fascinating talk. We could
Yeah,
go
thank
on
you.
and on. I'll have to have you back on, and we'll continue this in a part two.
That'd
Um,
be so much
but
fun.
yeah, John, please check out John Spencer's blog. His podcast I've been listening to is excellent. He's got this great new book out, The AI Roadmap, Human Learning in the Age of Smart Machines. Get it? There's so many good gems in here. And I just want to thank you again, John, for carving a little time and sharing some of your ideas with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, we'll talk soon. Thanks.
All right.